Hello, welcome back. My name is Aaron Tevebaugh. Today I'm here with a good friend and mentor of mine, Mr. Bill Westfall. Now, we told you in previous videos that we're going to be providing you solutions. Solutions for not only technology but people. Today we are going to talk about a concept that I've been teaching for a while, and I learned from Bill many years ago. He's actually been teaching about 35 years total now. But the concept is we only control what we can control. So we're going to dive into that today for you and talk about a few other things that really center around what we control and how we manage our expectations. All right, Bill, welcome to the Solutions Center. Appreciate you coming out today. As I said, I've known Bill now for about 13 years overall. Stumbled into a class of his back in 2011, and for some reason he keeps answering the phone, so I keep calling. Now, I'm not sure how long that's going to last, so what I wanted to do was get him in here today and share a little bit of knowledge for everyone. Sometimes, Bill, organizations go through change, whether it's a restructure, whether it's a realignment, and sometimes people struggle with that change. And so one of the things I really wanted to talk about today was your concept that you've taught and that I've really picked up and tried to run with and apply in this field, and it's we can only control what we can control. So can you kind of walk us through how you stumbled into that and really what put your radar on that to do the deep dive?
Sure. It was job frustrations that obviously we're going to have regardless. And I worked primarily in the public sector, but was going through a lot of difficulty. And I've been in the law enforcement field for a period of years, and this was with an agency in Florida, state agency, is going through a lot of change. And we were having tremendous amount of issues internally. A new director in that wasn't fitting very well, and a lot of things that happened there that were just unfair and wrong. And I have a good friend who helped put this in perspective. He said to me one time, he says, because I was saying to him, but it's so unfair, and he says, fair is where you sell your pig. And
which is true.
Well, and what he was trying to tell me is that really that's part of life. And if you step back, that these are really lessons. Every time you have one of these frustrations, there's something there, I will guarantee you, that we need to learn and should learn from this. And I also recognized that I was so frustrated by the people not maybe working to the standards I was working in, and all these other things. And I was becoming what I would call the captain of the world, okay? Well, that's an unpaid, underpaid position, and extremely frustrating. And I had some good mentorship there. I was very fortunate as well, too. And finally, it ultimately came to this conclusion. Some of it was reading. Actually, a little book the guy threw on my desk one day. It was a wonderful little book, which I would recommend to anybody, by the way.
And what's it called?
It was by James Allen. And interestingly enough, the book is well over 100 years of age.
Oh, wow.
It's sold literally millions of copies worldwide. It's called As a Man Thinketh. And it comes from an old proverb, as a man thinketh, so is he in his heart. And because I was frustrated about the agency, I was frustrated about this, and the book basically said this to me, and it really woke me up. He gave it to me and he threw it on my desk and said, you need to read the book. And I read it over the lunch hour. And the book basically said, if you don't like what you're doing and where you are, you've got nobody to blame but yourself. Now, I was furious, quite honestly, when I read that, because I had anticipated making a career change that had not come about, and I was stuck. And I was stuck in an agency. I didn't want to work. I didn't want to work with the people. I was underpaid. All the things that we have to deal with. And so I threw the book on his desk and I said, your book sucks. And he said, well, why is that? I said, because I have to be here. He said, well, actually you don't. And I had made a decision to stay. It was my decision. But I was blaming everybody for that, you see. And so I said, well, there's some things in life you just have to do. And he said, name them. I said, well, you've got to pay your taxes. And he said, well, actually you don't. He said, I said, well, if you don't, you go to jail. He said, well, that's right, but it's a choice. He said, and then he helped me out here. He said, everything, he says, the only one thing in life that you have to do, and that is?
None.
everything else is a choice. And it really was liberating, I found, okay? He was right. But I thought I had him too. I said, how about, I had a little baby girl at home at the time. This was before disposable diapers.
Okay.
You remember, most
No,
of you don't remember that. But let me tell you, that was not a pretty thing. And I said,
I bet.
I said, diapers. I said, man, you got to change diapers. And he goes, no, actually you don't. He said, you just leave them on there long enough. He said, in time, gravity will take them. He said,
which is also true.
It's a choice, you see that? So what he was helping me to understand is that you made the decision to stay here. And if you're that unhappy, then by all means, make a decision to leave.
Sure.
But if in fact, now, what is it you're going to, because he told me this, he says, the opportunities I was going to have in that other job would be, he said, but he was right about this, I was in Florida at the time, he says, what we're going to experience here in the next decade is going to be so instructive, and it was, until he was. And there's a lot that could be learned from that, you see. So what he helped me understand is, and he told me this, because people would go by my office, and I'd be going, this place sucks, the bosses suck, the weather sucks, the pay sucks, the retirement sucks, And
so you were Eeyore.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And people after a while were going by my, and they were just what an idiot basically. And he told me this: as you keep asking like this, you're going to find out people aren't going to what? They're going to hang out with you.
Right.
They're not going to think about maybe giving you opportunities or promoting you. He said, because he said the only thing that you control in this set of circumstances is yourself and your behaviors. And boy, that was just like somebody hit me right between the eyes, because I had to own all of that. And own every bit of it. But it's life-changing for me. And by the way, that book, I shared it with our commissioner there. There were 1,700 people in that agency.
Yeah.
He bought a copy for every person in the department.
And you read it over lunch, so it must have been a short read.
It was a quick read. And the man wrote it when he was 36 years of age. He decided he was going to be a philosopher. And he became one at 36 years of age. But by the way, for the women in the class, or that might be in the audience too, there's a version of that that's been modified.
Sure.
It's really a small book of philosophy for as a woman thinketh as well too.
Okay, so we've got an option for everybody.
Yes, sir.
So it doesn't sound like the phrase, you can only control what you can control, came from this individual. Was that something that you kind of crafted out of that lesson?
Oh, absolutely.
And how did that come about, like really putting that together in that format?
It's every day in your life. I'd have this discussion with my own family members almost every week. My wife is an example. It's got a frustrating circumstance socially right now. And she feels like she's not being treated well by these other people, as an example.
Okay. Pretty common.
Yes. And so I said to her, I said, well, how do you treat them? Because that's going to be reflective.
Yeah.
In other words, so they're not doing what you want them to do for you, but what are you doing for them? Because the only thing you really control here is yourself. Sure. So are you giving to them, hopefully, the kind of social behaviors that you would expect back and want back from them? And maybe they'll never give those to you. Well, what do? Is you give them a hug and God bless them, and you keep on trucking down the road. Then go find some people, because that's some of the great pieces of advice. I had another piece, if I can give this to you real quick. It was another class I was attending, and and it was the same agency. And I said to the instructor there, I said, well, I like what you're doing this week. I was getting a lot from it, but I said, but see, I go back home, and I go back to the same environment with these same people. And he said, well, let me ask you a question. He says, what happens when you get a good idea? Oh, well, I run down the hallway, and I tell people about it. He said, well, what do they tell you? And I said, oh, they tell me, oh, that'll never work. Well, we tried that before, and on and on. He says, you know what your problem is? My problem? He says, your problem is that you're hanging out with the wrong kind of people. And this was a great piece of advice. And he told me this. He said, you're hanging out with the Eeyores. That's what I was doing. He said, I'll tell you something. He was right about this. He says, you go find in that agency, as big as it was especially, go find people that think like you and want to do things like you want to be able to do them. And hopefully for the good of, if you will. You see? And if you have to, and this was great advice, if you have to buy their lunch, it will be time and money well spent. That was another great piece of advice. He was right about that. I went and found these, and I found them in the darndest places, tucked back in corners and file rooms, And here were these bright and remarkable people that had wonderful ideas and what they were just doing in their off time. An example with their hobbies, you see. So that was the other thing, is who I was surrounding myself with. And they were the Eeyores that were just self-validating. So I was very, very fortunate.
So you were kind of a product of that environment that you were in. You were placed there, but it sounds to me like you were able to see that just because I'm placed here, this isn't my limit, my boundary. I can explore outside of there and do something a little different.
And I tell you, the exposures I had in that 10 years, I would have never gotten had I moved on. It was absolutely instructive, because what Florida went through in law enforcement in that period of time, you name it, we had every potential, and then exposures that I got. I got to hang out with a Harvard type who was a very bright guy who was in our business, and did wonderful work with community policing. And I was there to basically handhold him,
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, what are you doing tonight for dinner? And I couldn't afford this, but I did it anyway. And he said, I got no plans. I said, can I buy you a steak, So I got George Kelling for 4 hours for a $20 steak at Brown Derby. And that was time. So that was me seeking out and making these opportunities came to me, because they're out there. We just don't find them sometimes. We're not looking for them.
Well, and you have to be able to see them, and I think you hit the nail on the head there if we're looking for them.
But I had a boss then that appreciated, I think, mind change on my part. That gave me those opportunities and those exposures too. I was very fortunate.
So that's kind of when it sounds like the whole phrase started and came about, and you realized it was a really strong concept. Was there a time where you went through another situation and it really hit you that there's something to here and I need to just continue to run with this ball?
Well, one thing, once I started practicing some of those things that I was reading about and getting from other people around me, it never stopped. Because there's these frustrations that we're going to have are constant and ongoing. What I've learned is, and rather than becoming victimized by those, well, why did this happen to me? Let's take aging as an example. My wife and I have gone through both of our parents aging and losing them. Well, what we figured out is there's something that we need to learn from this now. Because, and what it taught us about is, well, what happens when we age? And then how are we going to deal with our families? And what we don't want to put burdens on them, as an example. You see that? So my point is that you're going to have these, and who was it? I think Harry Reeder that said this one time, another good friend. He said the circumstances, these things that happen to you, don't dictate your character.
Yes.
They reveal it. Now, if he'd stopped there, I maybe wouldn't have shared that quote, but then he goes on to say, and give you an opportunity to refine it and improve it, basically, and grow it. So every one of these problems that we're given, there's some kernel of a lesson here. And we always, isn't this true? I mean, you talk to anybody that's been in sports or coaches, as an example, you learn more from your failures than you ever will from your successes. So what is it now I need to learn from this, and look in the mirror with that? That's hard to do, especially with failure, basically. But there's always this valuable lesson that you'll not learn any other way. No,
I think that's a good example too. We have a 15-year-old daughter who is a big softball player, and she's a high performer, and she gets frustrated when others on the team aren't playing to their capacity, but she's doing what she can do, so she's controlling what she can control at the plate as a catcher. But, she allows those things to impact her, and then that frustration, that stress then causes her to then start fumbling and making little mistakes. So we've been trying to work with her to try and figure out how you just get her to purge that.
See, that's the great opportunity for the parent or the coach to teach now. They'll always be more receptive when they fail than the success, because after success we just want to celebrate and have a piece of pizza, isn't that right?
Well, or it's just a numbers game. We want to get more and more and more. More wins, like a video game or something like that. So as you're going on with this whole you can only control what you can control, you start teaching it. Do you start finding over time people coming back to you with these testimonials of, hey, I've seen this, hey, something's going on here, hey, this worked for me? Because I can think of a handful just, in the past probably month or two, but is there any stories that really stand out for you over time where somebody comes to the front of the class on a break, which I've seen them do many times, and say, hey, I want to tell you about this? Is there anything that stands out to you there?
I was working at the time in this Florida experience in a file room with, 50,000 files.
About what year was this?
This is going to be 1976, 77.
Okay, I was born in 76, so I can relate.
and it was a constant update of these files manually. We was before computers, obviously, at that point in time. But it was a miserable job, and it was underpaid, and we got a great turnover in there, you know. But I had great young people there.
So like an internship, maybe, type of responsibility.
They were young people, probably their first employments, and you'd probably keep them for a year or so, basically. But I'll tell you what we decided, because I had a director at the time, there was a boss there that was just, he was difficult to work for. And so we decided back at, we're going to have fun in here. You know? We're going to turn this into a fun job, and we did. And we'd have music going sometimes, and I don't know, but we were meeting our standards, and it frustrated him to no end, because he'd hear us having a good time, and it was almost like he'd come up, but you're supposed to be miserable in here, and I can't tolerate this. So I had to finally sit down and say, you've given us work expectations here. You've told us what the standards are. Are we meeting the standards? And he looks at the data, and we're exceeding the standards. And so I said to him, I said, then we'll just shut the door, but we're going to still basically party, if you will. But anyway, I had a great crew there, and these young people, this turnover. But it was really interesting is that we practiced catching people doing things right. We celebrated. We tried to make the things that were boring fun. And when they went on to other work, and they would call me about, maybe once every 6 months to go have lunch. And what I figured out is they just needed that nice job. They just needed somebody to say to them, because they had gone to misery someplace out there, and in that type of environment, with that Eeyore environment that you talk about. So yes, that's been a wonderful thing to see happen, is them come back and realize that's all that and they did the same thing for me, just by spending that time with them.
Yeah, one of the things, in our foundations, our 5-day leadership development class that we put on, that I've found is something similar, is that, we talk about the video from Charlie Plum, where he kind of uses a road rage situation, if you will, and talks about someone cuts you off, and you're frustrated, you're angry, it ruins your day. This person who's driving along and drives off has control of your life. They don't know who you are. In the meanwhile, they go on about their life. Your day is ruined if you allow it to, because we control that. And he talks about drumming up cholesterols for a heart attack. And all that impact that has upon us. But really, I mean, would you say in your experience, it's just kind of how you see it? Like, what glass are we looking through? Is it half full? Is it half empty? We talk about the iceberg theory a lot too, and not really knowing what's going on underneath the surface with people.
That's a great piece.
So above the surface, we see we were cut off in traffic. Do we know what's going on below that surface? Is that person dealing with a dying loved one? Is that person just lost their job? Did they just find out they or a loved one has cancer? Like, what's going on there? And so with strangers, we tend to never find that out. With people that we work with, though, we have an opportunity to do that through asking questions and just getting to know them. And it sounds to me like the story that you're bringing up, where everyone was in an environment that they were enjoying, you found out we can control our metrics by making it fun for them, and we make them happy, we shut the door, we do our thing, everyone's happy. So have you found yourself really looking to find that happy medium, that balance in life when it comes to applying a lot of these concepts?
Yes, it's constant and ongoing and never ending. Just so many examples, going through my head right now. One thing I'd like to share with you is, because when Charlie Plum gives you that piece, and the dynamic that's happening there is when he gets cut off, is that he is frustrated, obviously, and he gets angry at those people. What he doesn't, and he illustrates this, and he talks about this. What you just did is you just give them control of your behavior and your life, you see? At this stage of my life, I'm playing a little pickleball,
Okay. Getting pretty popular.
I find it to be a really enjoyable game, and you don't have to have a lot of skill to be able to do it. And I live in a small town in southern Indiana, okay? And I don't believe the people that get upset over a point in pickleball,
Very competitive.
And I get that, I respect it, okay? And I say to them, I said, it's pickleball in Ferdinand, Indiana. Let's just put it in perspective and enjoy the day, enjoy what we're doing here, basically. So that's a big part of it, is realizing it's put it in perspective, especially when we don't know. And I love the illustration that you gave there. There's so many things that are going on in those people's lives that if we knew, we would be a lot more patient with them.
And so you're really trying to refocus people on saying, how really important is this, right?
Yes.
Like how bad is life in the grand scheme of
Especially
things?
most of us, we have problems that we can put on the tip of our tongue. Think about, as we speak in this day and age of Israel right now, or I mean just worldwide, I can't fathom what those people's days must be like day in, day out. No. But if I could share this with you, this is James Allen Peace, and he says that we will become victimized by circumstances so long as we believe we were the creature of outside conditions. In other words, you hear people talk about, well, mommy didn't, and daddy didn't, and whatever, you know, and they're victimized. And the problem is, in the law enforcement fight, we take these people to jail all the time, basically. And they got dealt bad hands, I get that, but so did a lot of us. And the difference was, we clawed out of them with especially maybe some help and with some mentorship. But he goes on to say that, he said, when we start to realize that we command the hidden soil and seeds out of which these circumstances grow, then you become the rightful master of yourself. And there was a wonderful book that was written, it was Jerry Harvey, that he said, the title of the book was, Why When I Find Myself Stabbed in the Back. In other words, I've been stabbed on the back by the job circumstance, change in job, just pay, whatever it might be, basically. But he said, I find my fingerprints on the knife. Now, he went back in his own life, and he was in his 60s when he wrote this book, and looked at the problems he was having career-wise. If he was objectively honest with himself, he had sown the seeds that created the reaction, you see, that he was now troubled by. So it gets back to what I say with my wife. How are you treating those people? Because that you have control of. You don't have control of how they treat you, but you might create the environment that might encourage them to hopefully treat you in the manner. You see that across your customer counters all the time. Smiles does incredible things, doesn't it?
Yeah, and a little conversation sometimes.
Oh, my word, yes.
I think that kind of segues into another piece of what you talk about regularly, and that's what part of this do I own? And so, you know, we've done some work with our friends at the Arbinger Institute out of Salt Lake City, and their piece, The Outward Mindset. And so they get into a model what's called collusion, whether it shows that what we do, others see, and they react to, then they do, and we see, and we react to. And so then it goes into this collusion circle, which is, you could say it's kind of like the ring of fire, because until someone realizes that they're contributing to that situation, nothing's going to change. It's going to go on and on and on, almost forever. So not only are we talking today about control and what we control and others control, but what part of that are we either feeding into, or at what point in time do we have to say, hey, I'm not going to allow it to continue in my life anymore, and I'm going to make this change?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can add anything to that, because that cycle is very real.
Yeah.
And this is the thing I think as a parent, or now as a grandparent in this world too, especially hoping to coach your kids to understand when they become a part of that cycle and they're contributing to it and deciding they make an adult decision. Just had that happen to one of my grandbabies. Very proud of her, because she's in first year of college now, where she broke a social cycle, realizing that it was going down the wrong, and did it. And we always talk about this. Doing the right thing is important, but the way that she do it, and the way that she did that is with resolve, but without any acrimony or with any anger, or frustration, or with no judgment as well too. And it was well received. So. Yeah.
So I also want to kind of talk about like public examples of things that I've seen as far as you can only control what you control. Back past the pandemic, we had a shortage, at least here, of servers, people working in the food industry. And so many times we go into a sit-down restaurant and there'd be a long wait, according to the staff, but you'd see all these empty tables. And so one night, my family and I walked into a restaurant, and that was the situation. We talk about expectation management, though. We expected it to be that way. We knew we were going to have a wait. We just didn't want to cook, so that was okay, right? Does that make sense? So we go in there, and there's an older gentleman in there, and he is just, I mean, causing all kinds of commotion. And he's standing at the, I guess the hostess would be the best way to describe it, the hostess bench. And he's yelling at this kid who's maybe 19. And I'm just sitting there in my mind thinking, number one, this kid has no control over this. And you can yell at this kid for an hour and a half, but it's not going to make somebody show up to serve your table any sooner. And so a really good friend of mine once told me is just be nice.
Yes.
I think you know the same person, right? And someone else, when I shared that with them, elaborated on that, and they said, it takes more energy and effort to be a jerk than it does just to be nice.
And
it really does.
Oh, my word.
And so when you kind of think about, what part of this do I own? He wasn't in that mindset. Controlling what we can control. We had no control over that. So we had two options. We either sit there and wait on a table to come open and have our dinner and enjoy ourselves, or leave. But yelling at the 19-year-old kid was not going to make either one happen any faster. So
that's a very troubled soul, and it's too bad because there's a lot you can tell just going on in his life. In classic into the blame game.
Sure.
And when you're in the blame game, it's invariably you are the victim.
Yeah.
And you're powerless again. So.
And a good example of that, so I know in a lot of your teachings you like to use Cracker Barrel as an example.
Yes.
When you talk about peak performance and consistency and really doing that. I had a situation with Chick-fil-A, and so that I thought was a positive in that, and only control what you can control. So I go through Chick-fil-A drive-through to get my breakfast, and very much, what is the reputation for most Chick-fil-A service?
Oh man, I say turn everything governmental over to them and let them figure out how to do it.
Was it safe to say impeccable would be a good word for them?
Oh yeah.
And so that's the expectation. And so you go to Chick-fil-A, and you talked about government service. I remember people laughing and making jokes about how if they would run an election, you wouldn't have the problems and those types of things. But we all know that logistics is their thing. It's spot on. They've got it figured out and all that. So I go through, use the app now because you get points, and I'm a cheapskate, so I like to save money. And so I go through, everything's on the app, and I also know exactly what it's going to say because I have to have my food a certain way. It's just how it is. So I get there, and I'm supposed to have a cherry Coke, and the girl brings me, I don't see inside my bags yet, but a blue soda, or whatever that was, some type of blueberry or what it was. And so I said, well, excuse me, ma'am, that I was supposed to have a cherry Coke. I don't think that one belongs to me. And so she looks at the ticket, because also there, they try to be so accurate. They print it on a ticket, and they put it on your drink, they put it on your bag, and a sandwich and those types of things. So she sees that, and she goes back to get me my cherry Coke. While she's doing that, I take a look at my sandwich because I have to get it without cheese, and normally it comes with cheese. The sticker says no cheese, but I'm going to make sure, so I open it up. It has cheese on it. And so she comes back, and I say, I'm so sorry, but this wasn't supposed to have cheese, and it does. And it's not something I can just take off, and make it to where I need it. And so she's like, I'm so sorry. You can tell she's getting stressed. She goes back in, gets the right sandwich, comes back and apologizes, and that was kind of my thing. Hey, it happens, appreciate it, you made it right, that's all you can do. And she didn't say anything, but she just subtly slipped in this card in the bag as she came back out, and it's for a free sandwich next time. And so I thought, there was one of those crossroads where I could handle it like the guy at the sit-down restaurant and be frustrated with her, even though she had no control over the people making the food. So it goes to probably two people before it gets to her. Someone just hands her a bag and says, dude in the truck, right? And she runs out there and hands it to me. But what's that going to do? It's going to put me in a bad mood if I allow it. It's going to possibly ruin my day, give me a headache, all those things that are going on. For what reason? Is that they fixed it and they moved on. And not only did they fix it, but they didn't have to do this, but they provided me that. And so I thought that was just kind of a really recent instance of kind of what you talk about in this whole concept of only control what you can control.
It's pickleball and Ferdinand. Mm-hmm. In other words, and you control it. The other thing too, I always tell people this, wait on tables. Do it once in your life. It's very humbling, for one thing, and you'll appreciate it. And you realize something that everybody thinks that they can abuse one person in their life, they can abuse a waiter or a waitress, basically. It'd be amazing, and I've seen this, and I'm sure you have too, just taking your time and being patient with them and treating them the way that you would want to be treated pays wonderful dividends. And because you can actually make their day. Simply by the way you treat them, and maybe leaving them a little extra for a tip as well too, given that how hard they do work for what they do. So,
and I mean, the other thing with that too is you really want to make someone mad who's crafting your food for you.
it's a good thing we probably don't know those stories.
Right.
Yeah.
But that was one of the things that I use now too. And I also was, my previous life, 21 years in law enforcement, we're always very picky about where we went,
Yes.
right, to eat. But one of the things I like to use now in foundations of leadership is that if you treat everyone like they're the person making your food at that time,
that's a great piece.
you're probably not going to go wrong.
That's a great piece.
Right? And so there's really no reason not to. Sometimes, we get stuck in our own icebergs and we get caught up in things and whatnot. But if we can kind of keep that at the tip of our mind, I think we'll do pretty good most of the time.
Yeah, the be nice piece. I like that. Just be nice.
All right, Bill. Well, this has been great. I appreciate you coming in today.
It's always a pleasure to be here. I want to tell you how much I enjoy the culture of this company and being around its people. So I'm always very privileged to be here. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thanks a lot, Bill. Well, that's going to be it for us today. So we appreciate you stopping by the Solution Center. We'd like to thank our special guest, Bill Westfall, for stopping by and hanging out with us. Also, if you like what you saw, please go ahead and like the video, subscribe to our channel, and also our contact information for both Bill, myself, and the organization is below. If you'd like to leave a comment and tell us anything you'd like to see moving forward on leadership development, or if you're interested in our Foundations of Leadership program or any subsets of, we'll also put the website and contact information below for that. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.